but a special welcome to everyone, and a special welcome to both Rod and Robin today. Of course, as you know, their history, they're both Honorary Research Associate Professors in the School of Historical and Philosophical Inquiry at the University of Queensland, and have had various roles to play over some period of time. But you've read all that, so I don't want to take up time unnecessarily. Many of you know them quite well, far better I'm sure than I do, even though I've known them for quite some time. Particularly Robin, of course, who was very much involved as a Children's Commissioner. But ladies and gentlemen, would you please give them a big welcome? And now they're going to take it in turns, I understand, and we're going to welcome Robin to the lectern first, and then they'll alternate from there. So special big welcome to them both. Thank you, Robin.
Well, it was International Women's Day on Monday and it's Irish Week starting, so I don't think we had much choice in choosing a topic. We'd like to thank everyone who's helped us in this project. They've provided records and photographs and above all their memories. In his Death, the Irish in Australia, Patrick O'Farrell selected the Queensland Irish Association as the most fitting illustration of the temper of 19th century Irish Australia. This is the cover of his book, we think. When I first looked at this book some time ago, I was taken by the poor man with his head on the table, obviously too much Guinness. And then I suddenly realised that in the middle were 3 women. Now, this is in the 1970s and women were not allowed at the St Patrick's Eve dinner. So I guess it piqued our interest a bit as to look maybe behind this photo, and we'll talk about that later, but also the presence of the women there. And so we thought, well, the history of the association would be incomplete without an investigation of the role of women. We're attempting to construct a history of the Irish Association that encompasses women. This was a much bigger challenge for the first 70 years, when it was largely accepted that the public sphere was a masculine domain and feminine intervention should be indirect or camouflaged. Thus, the pre-1960s backgrounding of women wasn't deliberate exclusion, rather it was in accordance with the ethos of the times, which held that men and women were innately different. Masculinity fitted men for the public sphere, while femininity equipped women with qualities designed for fulfilment in domestic and family matters. Nevertheless, the boundaries between the two spheres could blur, and we sought to identify occasions when the Irish Association provided opportunities for women to wield influence. These increased as the constitutional and cultural restraints on women's participation dissolved. It was also a response to resurgent feminism in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and the impact of an increasing number of women members on the association's culture and priorities. I got 2 minutes, he gets the next big section.
The QIA inherited a masculine culture from its predecessor, the Queensland Irish Volunteers, a predominantly, but not exclusively, Catholic ethnic militia, established with 300 members in Brisbane in 1887. The QIV, as you can see, projected an Irish warrior tradition, a diasporic expression of 19th century Irish nationalism. Its posture was denominationally inclusive, defensive rather than offensive. Founded by Irish Catholic solicitor and legislative councillor Andrew Thine, already an officer in the Queensland Defence Force Volunteers, the QIV was both a demonstration of Irish commitment to Queensland self-government and self-defence, and a riposte to persistent Orange allegations of Irish Catholic disloyalty. By 1890, the Irish Volunteers, in their green braided khaki uniforms, marched at the head of St Patrick's Day parades and contributed military drills to the day's sports. A spike in sectarianism in 1896 marked the beginning of the end for the Queensland Irish Volunteers. Thomas Joseph Burns, a former QIV captain, was defeated in elections for the Legislative Assembly, as were all other government candidates in Brisbane. There was a clean sweep of government Catholic members from Parliament. By 1890, the Volunteers, in their green braided, sorry, I'm wrong there. This coincided with a campaign by professional officers of the Defence Force to jettison the Irish and Scots ethnic units. Tactics included an attempt to ban Irish volunteers from marching in St. Patrick's Day processions in their uniforms. A further and fatal insult was the appointment in April 1897 of a non-Irish, non-Catholic professional officer to command the volunteers, overturning the customary practice of selecting by ballot a leader from within their ranks. Led by Captain Patrick Stevens, the Irish Volunteers disbanded. Many also belonged to the Australasian Hibernian Catholic Benefit Society, but as Protestant ex-volunteers were excluded from membership and as pan-denominational friendships had developed, it was decided that a new organisation embracing Catholic and Protestant Irish should be formed. They then regrouped as the Queensland Irish Association, embracing Catholics and Protestants, Liberals and Conservatives, while retaining the 19th century military's exclusively male composition. Stevens sought to recruit, and this is the first advertisement for members. If I can go in the right direction. All Queensland Irishmen interested in the establishment of an association on national, non-sectarian and non-political lines for the promotion of the union and brotherhood of our compatriots and the veneration of Ireland's best national traditions. Until the 1960s, the QIA's constitution defined its membership and mission in gendered terms. Its primary aim was, and I quote, to promote the union and brotherhood of Irish men and descendants of Irish men. Masculinity pervaded its culture. Its signifiers included a concentration on male sports, such as hurling, darts and billiards, the celebration of exclusively male Irish literary and legendary heroes, and a patriotic Irish militarism. In 1898, the association really substituted warriors of hurling and other male sports for paramilitary volunteers. The QIA invited the whole visiting New South Wales rugby team to its second ball in 1899. 3 years later, it honoured the visiting Irish Australian boxing champion, Larry Foley, with a concert. In 1914, William Helian, a noted Brisbane hurler, a former officer in the Volunteers and foundation member of the club, drove the establishment in the association rooms of a Queensland branch of the Gaelic Athletic Association, heavily invested in a muscular vision of Ireland. That's a photograph we found of the QIA team which won the competition in 1915. They were awarded the Scanlon Cup, donated by Pat Scanlon, proprietor of the Royal Hotel. That photograph was a quite precious souvenir and was later incorporated into histories of the association published on its various anniversaries. The only song in the 1928 compendium of the club's activities was J.I.C. Clarke's The Fighting Race, a militantly nationalist Irish-American celebration of Hibernian courage in rebellion and war, which included a toast to the pike, the sword, and the like. In similar fashion, summaries of the association's history prepared for its Golden Jubilee in 1948 and 75th Jubilee in 1973 departed from prose only for Ireland's national anthem, the Soldier's Song, declaring that Soldiers are we, whose lives are pledged to Ireland. In Erin's cause, come woe or weal, mid cannons roar and rifles peal, we'll chant a soldier's song. This constitutional effacement of women was not perceived as unjust discrimination. At the turn of the century, particularly in Irish Catholic circles, women were idealised as rulers of the home, whose crucial task was to nurture children and transmit the faith. This helps to explain the higher priority given to girls' education over that of boys by Queensland's most influential Catholic cleric in the 20th century, James Dewey. An emerging concern for gender equality was dismissed as a threat to women's domestic supremacy and mission. Patrick Crowe, a Brisbane stockbroker and foundation member of the association, told a Catholic Congress in 1905, to put man and woman on an equality is not to elevate her, but to degrade her. I'd better let Robin take over now.
The constitutional invisibility of women didn't mean that they were not involved in the association's establishment and operations in the decades before World War I. In the early years, women played an important, even indispensable role in its survival and operations. Their strategic contribution to the genesis of the QIA was acknowledged by Patrick Stevens, the Foundation Secretary, in his first annual report. In March 1899, he described the struggle to launch the association in the face of many difficulties, including raising finance, securing premises, and overcoming resistance and apathy. He singled out the efforts of a small number of members and contributions from non-members, including women. And this is a quote from the minutes. The success of the association in the past is largely attributable not only to the efforts of the members, but also to the generous and unsparing exertions of many ladies and gentlemen outside our body, who on many occasions have aided us by their energy and their talents. To them, the sincerest thanks to the association are due for their valuable and timely assistance. A close reading of Stevens' report suggests that the energies and talents of women contributed to the metamorphosis of the former Irish Volunteers into the QIA, but the identities of those women entitled to be listed in the founder's roll are so far hidden. The most important public activity of the association in its first year was an Irish ball in Brisbane's Centennial Hall on the 14th of July 1898. Balls were occasions where the public and private spheres intersected. They provided a respectable platform with unpredictable rather than prescribed gender hierarchies. This allowed women to meet and in some cases impress influential men outside their otherwise often circumscribed social circles. A project managed by wives, sisters and daughters of Foundation members, the inaugural ball not only reinstated a tradition of the Queensland Irish Volunteers, but ensured that its successor survived its precarious first year. Key women on the ball committee included the President, Ann Atkinson, wife of Queensland's first Irish Catholic Supreme Court judge, as well as sister of QIV founder Andrew Thine, the philanthropic Catholic widow Jessie Buchanan, Secretary Elizabeth Kingsbury, wife of Methodist barrister John Kingsbury, Foundation President, and Rosanna O'Sullivan, wife of Kingsbury's successor as President, Thomas O'Sullivan. Adding heft to this first group was Annie Burns, sister of Thomas Joseph Burns, who in April 1898 became Queensland's first Catholic Irish Premier. Burns' elevation to the premiership coincided with the QIA's founding and helps explain how the Women's Committee secured the patronage and presence of the Governor, Lord Lamington, for their inaugural ball. With both Governor and Premier in attendance, the ball was a triumph and contributed significant social and symbolic capital to the infant organisation. It also set the precedent for the triumphant display of symbols of nationalist Ireland, including the Green Harp flag. Annual Irish balls were a highlight of the association's and Brisbane's social calendar until 1911. In 1912, balls were replaced by similar Irish-themed at-homes in the same venue, Centennial Hall, with continuing patronage from the Governor and Premier. Despite the prominence of women in the club's social program, they were denied access to their premises, except on rare occasions. A ladies' afternoon in 1902 attracted hundreds of ladies who, by invitation, were permitted on this one occasion to enter the precincts of their men's folk national clubland. Later, the association repaid contributions of women with elaborately organised Brisbane River cruises on the government steamship Lucinda. Such official generosity reflected rapport with the Irish Association, cultivated by a series of pre-Great War premiers who sympathised with the Home Rule aspirations of the Irish community. The 1898 Irish Ball entered QIA collective memory, in sharp contrast to the sectarian humiliation of T.J. Burns and other Catholic ministerial candidates in the 1896 election. The ball, with its vice-regal and colonial government imprimatur, was testimony to Irish respectability and achievement. It demonstrated that the predominantly Catholic Irish community had secured a niche at the summit of Brisbane society. In 1915, a Brisbane correspondent for Sydney's Catholic Press recalled the role of women enabling the association to secure premises and survive in its first year, a feat in which the Irish Ball and the Ladies' Committee under Jessie Buchanan's leadership played a crucial role. A history of the organisation compiled for its 30th anniversary recorded the 1898 Ball not only inaugurated one of Brisbane's foremost social events, but also provided £95 for the purchase of the club's first billiard table. However, even while acknowledging their achievement, the association's historian, in keeping with the times, deprived married women of full identity by referring to all of them, except widow Jessie Buchanan, under the guise of their husband's first names or initials. They were Les Dames J.J. Buchanan, Patrick Reel, W.S. Byrne and J.J. Kingsbury, and rendered the single women barely visible by not supplying their initials, simply referring to Mrs. Oshea and Power, Nunda. While Ella Oshea was easy to identify because of the prominence of her two brothers in the foundation cohort, and because she was the only female in the Oshea household, Miss Power of Nunda could have been any one of three sisters of George Washington Power, another of the successful legal men among the QIA's founders. Jessie Jane Buchanan stands out as an exception. After being widowed in 1886, she endeavoured, not always successfully, to revert to her single first name initials, JJ, rather than those of her husband, JA. Ella Oshea was a notable presence at the first and subsequent Irish balls. She was a sister of association stalwart solicitors Timothy and Patrick Oshea, with the former serving as president from 1903 to 1906. Born in Killarney, County Kerry, Ella arrived in Queensland as a 5-year-old, the eldest of 6 children. Her mother died when she was 12. She took over the household and raised her 5 younger brothers. Timothy and Patrick were bachelors, and Ella remained single, caring for them in their Toowong riverside home, Middenberry. You might have seen this if you go on the ferry. You can see it's the old ABC Studios block that's now been taken over, but the house is still there. It was one of Brisbane's most celebrated addresses. She died there in 1949, granting Patrick's wish that he would not desert his cherished sister by predeceasing her. Within 3 days, he joined her in their Toowong Cemetery family plot. Ella's social skills, honed through her contributions to QIA balls and at homes in the years before the Great War, were deployed in wider Brisbane settings in the interwar period. She was an accomplished horsewoman, racing enthusiast, and travelling companion to her brothers. In the 1930s, one of Brisbane's most treasured social prizes was an invitation to attend the annual garden party at Middenberry, held in conjunction with the great public school's Old Boys Rowing Club regatta. Patrick was patron of the club and donor of the PJ Oshea Cup, awarded to the regatta's victorious team. In 1933, a camera captured the importance of this occasion with an image of the Governor, Sir Leslie Orme Wilson, flanked by Ella and Patrick Oshea. Ella Oshea presided at the summit of Brisbane society. Even Government House deferred to her. They used to plan their social events so that they didn't overlap with Ella's. In 1949, an obituarist captured her social power. In other years, governors had come to Middenberry with their felicitations. The Lord Mayor of Brisbane had brought orchids from his choice collection for her to wear. They were not humouring or patronising an old lady. They were received by a personage in her own right. Titled people, actors, artists, world celebrities were invited to Middenberry when they came to Brisbane. They found its halls a home and its gardens a sanctuary. Government House deferred to the O'Sheas, as I said, in scheduling functions. The Irish family's social ascendancy over governors in the interwar period awaits a fuller explanation. But there's little doubt that they bowed to Ella's authority, as a racecourse encounter demonstrates. This is a quotation from a newspaper. Meeting a governor at the races, Ella told him she wanted him to call at Middenberry the next morning, as she had something important to tell him. His Excellency came, flashing one of his well-known smiles. Miss Oshea seated him in the living room and then made an announcement. "You must have all your teeth out," she said. The governor's smile vanished, but soon afterwards he parted with his teeth. From the 1920s to the early 1960s, women were both there and not there at the Irish Association. Ignored in the Constitution and unwelcome on the premises unless by rare invitation or because they were required to undertake tasks as entertainers or service staff. In the 1920s, the Irish Australian tenor Alfred Oshea performed for members on several occasions. His concert team included women. In 1930, the association made a gesture to women in its background, staging a concert for members and lady friends. In March 1942, some 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the QIA abandoned its St Patrick's Eve banquet and procession in favour of a patriotic fair in its Elizabeth Street rooms. Women again came to the fore with planning and implementation of the 3-day event, led by Meta McGrath, wife of President Daniel McGrath, and Margaret Keogh, wife of Vice President John Keogh. It took another 2 decades for women to again receive prominence in the affairs of the QIA.
If we can think now about the 1960s, when there was an upsurge in feminism and a demand for gender equality, which affected the Irish Association. A rule amendment in 1963 expanded the associate member category so that women as well as men with Irish ancestry could join, though with limited rights. The nomination fee was a guinea on top of the 2 guinea annual subscription. This rule amendment indicated changing attitudes to women. It was also an effort to recruit new members. An advertisement sought to entice women with the assurance that ladies are well catered for, citing Saturday night dancing, cash prizes for amateur artists, educational bursaries for members' children, and free Christmas tree functions. The QIA's softening of its no women policy in 1963 was an early concession, albeit minor, to the spirit of the times, prompting women to challenge male practices of exclusion. Two years later, Brisbane provided an incident that heralded growing impatience among some women with the slow pace of gender reform. Merle Thornton, a University of Queensland academic, and her friend Rosalie Bogner attracted national attention by chaining themselves to the men-only public bar in the Regatta Hotel in Toowong, a popular venue for university staff and students. Its location opposite the ABC studios also ensured maximum publicity. The 2 women defied orders from hotel staff and police to leave the bar, precipitating the end of gender discrimination in Queensland hotels. Irish Association leaders were not only slow to adapt to the changing gender balance of power, but also, in some cases, reacted to pressures for reform with hypermasculinity. they battened down to defend their last bastion, the traditional male-only St Patrick's Eve banquet. The 1971 president was Solicitor Len Moynihan, head of an all-female, 5-daughter household. He admitted admiration for the part played by women in celebrating the National Day of other Brisbane ethnicities, but obdurately declared that there was no room for women at the 16th of March dinners. He defiantly told members, "Resisting all pressures, we have succeeded in retaining this exclusively for males, and with 550 present, we have reached our capacity." He was aware of opposition to his stance, but he dismissed it by telling a misogynist joke. But no matter what you do, or how you do it, or what you say, you can't please everybody, as Pat found out. Pat and Mick, so the story goes, lived together for many years, had grown up together, and were firm friends. But because of a change in their circumstances, they became separated. Finally united, they were astonished to find that they had each married. Mick said to Pat, "What's your wife like?" He said, "Mick, she's a perfect angel." "Gosh," said Mick, "you're lucky, mine's still living." While Len Moynihan's loyalty to the exclusively male St Patrick's Eve dinner was shared by most members, there were significant exceptions, even in 1971. Len's misogynist defiance provoked an immediate response from Father Thomas Hunt, who was supported by barrister William Cuthbert. Irish-born Father Hunt, Augustinian parish priest at Coorparoo, was a self-described apostle of women's liberation, who proposed the toast, "The Day We Celebrate." He began by chastising Len Moynihan and the association for their misogyny. He recounted that on arrival at Tara House, he met an Irish International Airlines hostess delivering shamrocks, especially flown in for the banquet. He asked her at which table she would be sitting, and she replied, "Women are not permitted to enter here." He pointed to anomalies in this ban because 19th century Ireland was progressive on gender issues and produced 3 women who had left a remarkable imprint on Brisbane's history and townscape. These were Catherine Macaulay, the founder of the Sisters of Mercy, whose legacy to the city included the Mater Hospital in South Brisbane and All Hallows in Fortitude Valley. The second was Mary Aikenhead, who established and brought to Australia the Sisters of Charity, providing Brisbane with Mount Olivet Hospital, a Kangaroo Point landmark. The third was Nano Nagel, founder of the Presentation Sisters, responsible for St Rita's College at Clayfield. Father Hunt concluded his rebuke by saying, "Gentlemen, that little Irish girl from Irish International Airlines comes from a land that had the liberation of women 1 century ago." The Irish Association responded cautiously, even reluctantly, to the rapidly changing gender balance of power, both inside and outside the organisation. It embarked on a series of incremental reforms. The value women could add was demonstrated when a group of associate members formed the Tara Strings Chamber Orchestra. The founders included Junie Brennan, Lynn Roberts and Joan Bevan. In 1980, the QIA permitted women associate members, including Mavis Williams, to join its prestigious and previously exclusively male pipe band. This was not a deliberated gender reform, rather a pragmatic decision by Pipe Major Sandy Campbell, who seized an opportunity for additional recruits and added a third C unit to the A and B bands. Each of the 3 new female recruits were treated as one of the guys. Indeed, Mavis Williams was representative of many of the Australian-born women with Irish ancestors who joined the association in the 1980s. Women enhanced the cultural mission of the QIA, which had been a priority since its inception. One of the foundational aims was to encourage literature generally, and Irish literature in particular, by arranging courses of lectures, the reading of papers, and discussion of subjects of interest. This was subsequently enshrined in its constitution as its second and notably gendered objective: to promote the study of Irish history, literature, and national traditions, and a more intimate acquaintance with the careers of distinguished Irishmen. After World War II, the Association amended this rule to include an Australian as well as an Irish focus, and to assist the members of Association children through such means as bursaries and donations. Women ran or revitalised existing cultural programs such as Irish Studies, the Pipe Band, Irish Dancing, the Tara Strings Chamber Orchestra, and the in-house publication Tara News. Women also initiated a raft of new programs, including the Irish Debutante Ball, 1980, the Cultural Committee, 1985, Teague Gaelic Ladies Gourmet Club, 1987, St. Brigids Dinner, 1989, Tara Singers, 1995, and the Rose of Tralee Quest in 1996. One of the doyens of Brisbane's Irish Australian community, publican Jan Dooley, wife of Association Life member Dr. Tom Dooley, was largely responsible for reviving Brisbane St. Patrick's Day parades in 1990, after a lapse of 50 years. Perhaps the most substantial innovation was the Cultural Committee, launched in 1985 by Patricia Kelly, following discussions with Patrick Brennan. They tried to answer the question how the QIA could encourage a celebration and understanding of our Irish heritage. Kelly also envisaged the committee as a means of increasing women's participation. By the end of the 1980s, the Cultural Committee had extended its reach to Queensland universities, the State Library and Museum. In 1987, it convened the first Festival of Irish Drama for secondary schools. Moreover, the committee tapped Irish Studies expertise in other states, sponsoring colloquia on Irish Australian themes. Kelly's reforms gave priority to Irish Australian studies at tertiary level. Winners of new QIA Irish Studies prizes included feminist literary scholar Rebecca Peelan, who won 2 scholarships, and accomplished Brisbane historians Denise Sweeney and Sister Rosa McGinley. I'll ask Robin now to take over.
The rise of Australian and Irish women to high political and other offices in the 1980s and 90s highlighted the contradiction between the Association's maintenance of its male-only banquet tradition and social changes wrought by feminism. There are also contradictions between the club's political and religious inclusiveness and exclusion of women from its most important annual celebration. The price likely to be extracted for banning women became apparent in 1981 when Malcolm Fraser, the first incumbent Prime Minister to visit, was guest speaker. Fraser's wife Tammy declined to join her husband, partly influenced by news that she could not attend the dinner. 2 women journalists covered Fraser's visit: Michelle Grattan, who's still writing, senior political correspondent for the Melbourne Age and Australian Financial Review's Ann Summers. Unlike 9 male colleagues, they refused entry to the banquet. President Bill Teichman explained that it was an association tradition that St Patrick's Day dinners were for men only. Grattan protested that she'd never before been barred from a dinner at which the Prime Minister was speaking. The incident prompted Grattan and Summers to retaliate in their columns. Both decried Secretary Maloney's claim that the band was all about tradition. The bar was probably too. The band was all about tradition, toilets and precedent. If an exception was made for Grattan and Summers, it would create a precedent for women associate members and members' wives. Toilets were perennially invoked to justify the ban on females. In 1981, the association claimed that women's toilets had been reserved for high-table male guests. Since women had been admitted as associate members in the early 1960s, there were 2 toilets, one for males and one for females. Oh, sorry, thank you. Is that better? Okay, so I hope you know there were 2 toilets, one for males and one for females. However, as generous consumption of alcohol was a feature of the men's one night of the year, the banquet tradition included the necessity for men to commandeer the women's toilet. The Malcolm Fraser evening earned the Irish Association long-lasting media enmity. Grattan and Summers conducted a protest conference outside the QIA premises during the dinner. Quentin Dempster, Queensland President of the Australian Journalists Association, labelled the Irish club sexist in the extreme. The Queensland Irish Association had acquired influential media enemies, alert to any further evidence of Elizabeth Street hypermasculinity. The Grattan-Summers imbroglio, a female member's complaint to the Human Rights Commission, and condemnation from the State Council of the Labor Party for flouting sex discrimination legislation contributed to further gender reform. The club moved to allow women to become full members. This required jettisoning the male persons criteria for national membership. Though a 1982 attempt by President Bill Tyquin and board member Leo Luton was approved by 68% of members, it failed because Queensland legislation governing friendly societies required 75% member support for constitutional change. At its 88th annual general meeting on the 21st of September 1986, the association succeeded in substituting Irish people for Irishmen in its definition of eligibility for national membership. The decision to admit women with Irish ancestry as full members was taken without arousing much interest or opposition. Only 71 attended the annual general meeting considering the proposal, with 81% voting for reform. Leo Luton dismissed suggestions the club was responding to complaints to the Human Rights Commission. He emphasised the evolutionary process of extending membership rights to women. The beneficiaries were chiefly associate members, wives and daughters of male members. The election of Sally Ann Atkinson as Brisbane's first female Lord Mayor in 1985 was a sign of the increasing vulnerability of the Irish Association's gender restrictions, as the Lord Mayor was a traditional guest at the high table for St Patrick's Eve banquets. Sally Ann in 1986, that's a photo of Sally Ann. In 1986, the QIA called a special committee meeting to confront this challenge. It resolved to invite her, but only as Lord Mayor and not as a woman. It's very convoluted, doesn't it? Sally Ann diplomatically declined sending a male alderman to represent her. President Bill Tyquin introduced official guests, ruled out the possibility that Atkinson was setting a precedent for other women. I say very sincerely to the lady that we appreciate her coming along in her position of office. In deference to Sally Ann's presence, the women's toilet was cordoned off for her exclusive use, leaving long queues outside the male toilet. At the 1987 banquet, Sally Ann Atkinson was again the sole woman among 11 male speakers. She gently rebuked the association for gender discrimination. Bill told me I was to be invited, but only, mind you, as the Lord Mayor and not as a woman. So knowing my place tonight, my speech will be brief. Atkinson told a gender joke, unlike those customarily heard at these banquets. It was made at the expense of males rather than females. She introduced the subject of the economy and economists, describing an economist, she wasn't unsure whether he was Irish, as a man who knows how to make love 8 different ways, but doesn't know any women. Tyquin, though, had the last word. In the official record of speeches, Atkinson's speech appears last, after the President's closing remarks. Gender activism accelerated in the late 1980s. Margaret O'Dowling, disgruntled with the male-only banquet, proposed a female counterpart, a St Brigids Dinner. An all-female St Brigids Dinner attracted 300 women, was inaugurated in Tara House on the 1st of February 1990, St Brigids Feast Day. The group's banner, designed by O'Dowling, was prominent. It integrated Irish and Australian crosses on a blue field, a golden St Brigids cross set within Australia's Southern Cross constellation. Guest speaker Sally Ann Atkinson congratulated the gathering on responding to the St Patrick's Eve banquet with a fine display of Irish feminism. She noted, though, the irony of naming an all-female dinner after the proto-feminist St Bridget, an advocate of egalitarianism. St Bridget actually had a male monastery and a female monastery side by side. Today, a small but increasing number of men attend this dinner. The visibility and organisational influence of women grew throughout the 1990s. In 1994, Nola McCormack, co-founder of St Brigids Dinner, was elected the first woman director, outpolling 4 men. President Pat Brennan spoke of over our dead bodies resistance from some male members to women directors. Well, said Brennan, the bodies are dead. A woman has arrived. Pauline Donegan, another tireless cultural contributor, was elected first female vice president in 1998. The high point of the 1990s was the centenary dinner on the 9th of September 1998, attracting 800 supporters. The special guest was Mary McAleese, President of Ireland, whose official visit to Australia was initiated by an invitation from the Queensland Irish Association. It was a spectacular night for women. The President was welcomed by the Tara Singers, accompanied by pianist Patricia Devereaux, singing Patricia Kelly's new setting of Sayed Mila Fata. The finale included Irish dances directed by Kathleen Maloney. Tara News editor Patricia Kelly used the centenary year to highlight Mary McAleese's visit and achievements of Irish women in Queensland. She also subtly chided the association men for their feeble centenary commemoration of women, pointing to the absence of any formal event during February, the month allocated to their remembrance. Patricia Kelly prepared several exhibitions featuring notable Irish women contributors to Queensland healthcare and education, complementing Honorary Librarian Timothy Moroney's displays on the contribution of Irish men in these areas. Despite the increased visibility of women in the 1990s, the St Patrick's Eve banquet continued as a provocation for some women and men. Hopes that the more militant association feminists and external critics would mute their opposition to the exclusively male event because of the installation of St Brigids Dinner as an all-female equivalent were dashed in 2000. That the guest speaker was Prime Minister John Howard and the feminist member Rebecca Pellin was again denied a ticket made the event a symbolic gender battlefield that has not been seen since the Regatta Hotel incident 35 years earlier. The Brisbane Courier Mail lampooned the association with a cartoon of John Howard toasting Queen Elizabeth II at a dinner denying women a presence. Sydney's Irish Echo ran an editorial headed QIA Stag Dinner and Embarrassment, after one of its female journalists was also denied entry. President Pat Brennan resorted to familiar justifications. Women wouldn't enjoy the event. They had their own St Brigids Dinner. A century-old tradition was at stake, and there were not enough toilets to accommodate ladies. As the Prime Minister, cordoned by Queensland Police, entered Tara House, the Irish pipe band drowned out protesters' cries of sexism and misogyny. Someone told us recently that John Howard said he wished he'd had a pipe band to drown out all of his hecklers. The 2000 dinner exhausted Peelin's patience with the slow progress towards full gender equality. She launched a public critique, noting that the QIA's use of tradition to excuse the exclusion of women was, to her mind, misleadingly selective. A Belfast-born Protestant atheist and nationalist. I should add that we had some communication with Pellin, and she herself described herself as a Protestant atheist. And I said, what's a Protestant atheist? And she said, well, if you live in Northern Ireland, you can be an atheist, but you've got to say whether you were from the Protestant or the Catholic side. So I learned something from the email. Pellin likened the predominantly Catholic Irish Australian Association officials' use of tradition to the arguments justifying orange marches in Northern Ireland. On St Patrick's Day 2000, she lodged a complaint with the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commission. 8 months later, a conciliation hearing ruled in Pellin's favour. The QIA reluctantly accepted the outcome, with President Pat Brennan publicising disappointment that the case has been brought by a winner of 2 of its Irish scholarships. While the Pellin case was hailed as a victory for women, it doesn't easily fit the presumption of binary conflict between males and females. Many women opposed demolition of the men-only dinner tradition. Mavis Williams, who I think is present today, told us that most women were happy with the status quo. It was a men's dinner, that was just it. Pelham was in no doubt that many members and most officials disagreed with her recourse to a government commission. She was asked, why don't you just let the poor old buggers have their one night? Or more rudely, told to get a life or jump off a cliff. On the other hand, she had a small group of loyal supporters. All were Irish born and included as many men as women. They were typical of the broader membership, younger, socialised as couples, and rejected what they felt was the outmoded sexism of the club. Apart from Pat Brennan's reference to the alleged ingratitude of Rebecca Pelham, gender convulsions surrounding the 2000 dinner were officially ignored. The annual report recorded the evening as the year's highlight, only listing distinguished guests headed by Prime Minister John Howard. The gender-inclusive 2001 St Patrick's Eve dinner also proceeded without official comment. Most women members declined to take advantage of this new opportunity. Helen was also absent, having returned to Ireland in January to take up an academic post. About 8 of her women supporters and partners, none prominent in the organisation, attended the function. They were seated at the most remote table in the room. And there's going to be a man have the last word.
Thank you, Robin. From the perspective of 2021, the Queensland Irish Association has a history of incremental gender inclusion with occasional skirmishes rather than wars. We make that point because even internationally, the QIA has acquired a reputation for misogyny. There's an international history of St Patrick's Day which picks out the QIA as an example of a sexist Irish organisation. We reject that judgment. If you look at the history of the association and its gender squabbles, you notice that opposing factions comprise men and women. Its 9-member board of directors now includes 3 women, reflecting the gender composition of the organisation. After the Grattan exclusion of 1981, the QIA acquired national notoriety for misogyny, reinforced by the furore over John Howard's presence at the 2000 all-male dinner. There was a whiff of southern condescension when Howard reacted to protests over his apparent endorsement of such a sexist occasion with the remark, "This is probably the only place in Australia where such a gathering could be held," as though male-only dinners were unknown in Sydney or Melbourne. National and international branding of the organisation as atypically misogynist appears unwarranted. Apart from occasional lapses, the QIA practiced respectable masculinity rather than its hyper-extreme. It was the first inner-city Brisbane club to admit women. The nearby Tattersalls Club did not vote to accept women as full members until 2019, over 3 decades after the QIA precedent. A Caledonian equivalent, the Queensland Society of St Andrew of Scotland, held its 71st annual men's dinner on the 29th of November 2020 without controversy. The apogee of the QIA's history in the 1990s was fueled by a cultural renaissance. At the 1995 St Brigids Dinner, before an audience of 360, director Nola McCormack thanked all women who had made this possible and worked for the association since 1898. She recognised they had always been part of the organisation, though with varying visibility and acknowledgement. It was not until the 21st century that women who helped make the Queensland Irish Association Australia's leading ethnic organisation at its 1998 centenary were formally honoured. In 2011, Patricia Kelly and Nola McCormack became the first Women Life members, followed by Pauline Donegan in 2012. Now that brings our presentation to a finale. But if we could just go back to the cover on O'Farrell's book, we're still not sure what those three women were doing. It was at the 1944 St. Patrick's Eve dinner. So if anyone could shed light on that, we'd be very interested to hear from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.